Welcome to this Information Services Today webinar on design thinking and managing collections and technology. This webinar addresses content from Part 4, Managing Information Organizations, specifically focusing on chapters 23, 24, and 25. This webinar is part of a 10-webinar series representing the diverse authors and topics of the second edition of my book, Information Services Today, an Introduction. As the editor, I am thrilled to be presenting this webinar series in conjunction with my textbook, Information Services Today, an Introduction. Hearing directly from the contributing authors as they reflect and share their insight on today's information landscape is a unique opportunity to glean from their expertise, both the opportunities and challenges that lie on the horizon. Stephen Bell recently said, "It helps leaders to harness their own creative potential, but they should also pay attention to creating the right culture and environment that lead to a creative library organization as a whole." Part 4 introduces readers to a range of management roles, from developing a strategic plan to design thinking, from collection management to managing the technological landscape of the information organization. But Part 4 also goes beyond these organizational roles to also look at how to manage the rapidly changing information organization. This section provides guidance on how to foster innovation and strategic planning to make the information continually relevant to its community. The section also has a dedicated focus on the management skills and competencies needed of today's information professionals to meet today's challenges. In this webinar, we'll be hearing from the authors of chapters 23, 24, and 25 from Part 4 of the book. Chapter 23 highlights strategies for innovation in the information organization by focusing on design thinking. Chapter 24 discusses collection management and the important role that strategic planning plays in ensuring a technologically rich collection. And Chapter 25 explores management strategies for current and emerging technologies, including automating operations and the new generation of technological resources. Of tremendous value to this book are its contributing authors. These authors were specifically chosen for their expertise, passion, and commitment, not only to the field of information science, but also to the professional development of tomorrow's information leaders. I'd like to now introduce the panel of authors for this webinar. Rachel Ivy Clark is currently an assistant professor at Syracuse University's School of Information Studies. Her research focuses on the application of design methodologies and epistemologies to librarianship to facilitate the systematic, purposeful design of library services. Rachel is the author of Chapter 23, Innovative Library and Information Services, the Design Thinking Process. Wayne T. Disher is author of several textbooks, including Crash Course in Collection Development and past director of library services at Hemet Public Library, and he comes to us from the School of Information at San Jose State University. He is the author of Chapter 24, Managing Collections. Marshall Breeding is an expert in information technology, a columnist for computers in libraries, and the author of the annual Library Systems Report in the American Libraries. He is the author of Chapter 24, Managing Technology. There are 6 key themes that were identified for the second edition of Information Services Today, an Introduction. Chapters 23, 24, and 25 each address 3 of those key themes. Their chapters address how libraries and information centers will remain valuable entities in their communities, but also thrive. But to thrive, they will need to remain creative, innovative, and technologically advanced. Second, new competencies, roles, and opportunities for today's information professionals. And the third theme that they addressed is the challenges and key issues of the field for the sustainability and essentialness of information organizations. Rachel, Wayne, and Marshall, what is your interpretation of these themes, and how do they specifically relate to your chapter's content? Rachel, we'll begin with you.
Thanks, Sandy. The way that the themes relate to my chapter, first of all, design thinking is an iterative 4-stage process that I describe in the chapter. The 4 main phases being identifying a problem, coming up with ideas to address that problem, creating and implementing those ideas, and then assessing and reflecting on those ideas. And it's an iterative cycle. So in this way, that there's actually phases that support ideation and creation, design thinking is massive support to creativity, innovation, and technological advancement. It both focuses pre-existing skills in that space, but it also offers a means for people to learn those skills, people who might not inherently think of themselves as creative or innovative people. It also re-envisions roles for librarians and information professionals in terms of thinking of ourselves less as the traditional stewards of information and more as creators, developers, and designers of information tools. And I think it also speaks to the theme of sustainability because it's an iterative process. It's not just creating a tool and implementing it in your organization, but there's an ongoing process of constant reflection and constant improvement.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd like to now hear from Wayne.
Thanks, Sandy. The themes that are expressed in the book have been some that I've been grappling with for at least a decade. This idea that libraries face some questions about relevance in the future have some disturbing implications and interpretations, and I had that in the back of my mind when I wrote this chapter. My philosophy on libraries and collection management went through a bit of a transformation about 7 or 8 years ago when I was a library director in Southern California, and our community services department of the municipal government got a new person in place, and this person had absolutely no library experience. And my city manager asked me to mentor this person, and the first day we went out to lunch, he asked me, "So, Wayne, what does a library without books look like?" I was completely dumbfounded. Here I was, a library director, a library educator, and I'd never once actually asked myself that question: what does a library without books look like? And here's the thing, right? He's probably not the only one who's thinking that, particularly people in municipal government. They have probably been asking this very question about library relevance. So I had this in the back of my mind when I wrote the chapter as a way to encourage readers to explore for themselves what it might mean to them to manage a library collection where the content is perhaps completely morphed into unexpected items, something that we're not really sure will be, and may even be non-quintessential things. And that's what I sort of took with the themes of this book as I wrote this chapter. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. So let's turn it over to Marshall.
Well, so in my chapter and a lot of the work that I do, I think about kind of the strategic technologies that libraries need in order to kind of carry out their missions, to remain viable and be successful and what they do. And in the chapter, I kind of take a pragmatic approach and I look at a lot of the kind of strategic technology infrastructure that libraries need in order to do that work. A lot of information about resource management systems and discovery platforms and so forth that help the library kind of manage the collection, provide access to it. But it's important that information organizations kind of continually think about renewing their technology to make sure that they're keeping up with the need to support the ever-changing scholarly communication trends, changing organizational priorities, and kind of the changes in technology itself. Also, I'm very cognizant that there isn't one size fits all. All the different kinds of information organizations need different kinds of support and technologies, and to kind of walk through kind of what some of those issues might be for organizations like a public library, university library, research and development centers, corporate information centers, and so forth. The trends in each of those are just so different. and the case that there's just not one piece of software that will do it for each organization, that often it's an integration of several different types of resource management and discovery services. As we look at the next slide, you know, these come with kind of a lot of associated implications. What kind of competencies do information professionals need as all of these changes take place? So the key points are to kind of think about it strategically and design an integration of technology programs that best serve the organization.
Thank you very much, Marshall. So I was wondering, do any of you have any further observations or comments for each other on this, on that aspect of themes, or what your colleagues had to say?
Well, I noticed at the end there, Marshall was using the word design. So I just kind of want to point out that I see design as being embedded in all areas of library and information services. So both in collections, as Wayne mentioned, and as Marshall mentioned as well. I think it's something that's applicable across the board and that can help us investigate and perhaps address these problems. Like what I think Marshall makes a great point in terms of what is right for this particular context in this particular organization, and it's always going to vary. So being really aware of that and open to finding out what might be the right solution for the right context.
That's great. Thank you, Rachel. And design thinking could be one tool, one way to help achieve that. That's great. Excellent. Any other comments or observations?
No.
Okay, great. Well,
Thanks.
okay, we'll move on then. So let's now direct our attention to today's information landscape. The first edition of this book came out 3 years ago, and as we know, the field of library and information science is in constant flux. What are some of the key changes as they relate to your chapter's topic that have occurred since the first edition came out 3 years ago? I'll turn to you, Rachel, first.
Yeah, so I think a big thing that we've seen is the rise of interest in design thinking across the board. Just in general, it's really taken off in the last couple of years. You can see here's just something I pulled from Google's Ngram, looking at the phrase and the prevalence of the phrase design thinking in literature. It's gaining traction in a lot of different domains. It's being applied in business. It's being applied in education. And as we can see from the next slide, I'm especially excited to see how it's being increasingly adopted in librarianship and other related information professions. So places like Aarhus Public Library in Denmark or the Chicago Public Library have really been explicit about embracing design thinking in their work. There's a new design thinking for libraries toolkit that was developed by IDEO, the design firm, in conjunction with these libraries. Library Journal is starting to offer online courses and education in applying design thinking in your library, which is also applicable to many other information institutions. And I'm really excited to see design thinking being increasingly incorporated in LIS education and things like MLIS programs. I know San Jose State recently introduced a course specifically in design thinking. So I'm really excited to see this rise of interest in the design thinking space in library and information professions.
Thank you, Rachel. And Wayne, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of funny when I think back on the angst that I had revising the chapter. While initially there had been this huge explosion of the popularity in ebooks, when I was asked to revise the chapter, I was reading new data that was kind of showing the opposite, that the popularity of ebooks was waning. So rather than get caught up in the debate on the popularity of certain formats and collections, because let's face it, there's always going to be an ebb and flow of the types of collections in our libraries, I wanted to encourage readers to think about how collections could be used rather than how much they will be used. And I want readers then to think about the possibilities that new formats like digitization offer. For example, new points of access or content creation. As an example, one trend I'm seeing right now that really points out the need for some more creative collection management strategy that I advocate in the chapter is in inventory control, because I see library staff are extremely transaction focused, and we spend a huge amount of time moving books from one point to another and tracking how many times we use physical stuff. And we control how many and how long and how we move this stuff around libraries. And I think that in the digital world, and as we move on to the 21st century, that these sort of transactions are going to be less meaningful in the library world. So how can we learn from models like Amazon.com or Netflix, where libraries are focusing more on downloading and how to get users from coming into the library to check something out to downloading or moving them to a different business model. So making it more economically reasonable, I think, to both the business and the end user. So these, I believe, are the issues that tomorrow's collection managers are going to be focusing on, and I hope I encourage that in my chapter.
Thank you very much, Wayne. And Marshall.
So in the technology realm, it's really interesting to think about how quickly things change. They change very quickly, but how quickly do they change in the library world? Sometimes not quite as fast. So it's, you have to kind of both think about the technologies available in kind of the broad industry, and then how they've been implemented in libraries and other information organizations. So the big change has been kind of more pervasive use of cloud computing, that more and more organizations are shifting away from systems maybe they implemented locally to those that are hosted by a vendor, or more and more that are truly kind of multi-tenant platforms. There's more thinking about kind of bringing in new aspects of functionality beyond traditional resource management, things like customer relationship management. How can a library kind of build information, build a data warehouse about their user and their population and demographics in order to be able to start thinking more strategically about how to shape their services and to deliver customized services to their customers. Again, the need for kind of data-driven decision-making, to be strategic about the way that libraries and other organizations kind of make decisions, both strategic and operational, based on real data. And look at the next slide quickly. To adapt to the changing milieu that we see in customer and consumer technologies, and how the scholarly communications era is changing, and so forth. The changes in our larger world certainly impact how libraries need to implement technology in order to be able to best deliver their services. The media are going to change constantly, ever-changing mixtures of digital, electronic, and print content. And we're seeing broad changes in the realm of scholarly communications, especially a lot of consolidation surrounding workflow tools, analytics, and peer review tools, and those kinds of things that, again, impact the way that organizations consume information, provide access to it.
Thank you, Marshall. So I personally am really excited that we are able to add the area of design thinking into this book and into the webinar series as well. It's something that, as Rachel pointed out, is something that has really taken on a strong focus in the field of library and information science, and taken from outside the field of library and information science, and also the really interesting changes in the areas of collections and technology as well. I want to open up to our speakers to see if they had any observations or comments or questions for each other that they would like to add. Okay, well then we will continue on to the next part. So now let's direct our attention to the future. So what trends or emerging issues will impact the field of library and information science as it relates to your chapter's topic? So Rachel?
Yeah, so I think one of the big elephants in the room with design thinking is the pushback. Is design thinking just a fad? Is it just a trend that's going to drop off? And there's, as you can see, I just grabbed a selection of headlines that have been written about this, the sort of already backlash against design thinking. And my reaction to that, and people in LIS who are interested in design thinking, is to say that design thinking is just one aspect of design that we might be able to draw on in our work. If we look, for example, at the chart on the next slide, we can see that design is a huge space and there's a lot going on. And obviously I don't have time in this webinar to get into this, but things like user-centered design, participatory design, critical design are all additional techniques and principles within the design world that we can be drawing on. And where I think this becomes an important issue in our field is the idea of values and being really sensitive to the values, especially in the library profession, but also information professions at large. We're seeing a lot of things emerge right now, issues like bias in algorithms and how do they get there? How does it get there? How does it get embedded? And how do we combat that? And thinking about design in a very explicit way, as opposed to just sort of going along sort of tacitly or implicitly, I think can really help future information professionals think about these types of issues. How do we design better technology systems in our library that support the values of libraries? How do we design collections like Wayne was talking about that support these new downloading models or are more like Amazon and Netflix, but that also incorporate library values as opposed to maybe more commercial values? I think that's a big issue that I'm seeing emerging in the field at large and a place where I think design might be able to help.
Thank you, Rachel. Wayne, what are your thoughts?
Well, as I think about the future of collection management specifically, the one thing that I tried to emphasize in the chapter was the need for students and readers to think strategically and to always involve the community in that process. So the one thing that immediately comes to mind as we've been talking about the previous slide and as we were just listening to design, this idea for libraries, the need to reevaluate the traditional idea of rationing our collection. You know, our entire service model, if you think about it, is based on scarcity. In the library world, the idea that you can have it when you want it really isn't part of the mantra. And I think our communities are getting frustrated with that. There's a sense that because such a gigantic part of our collections are shared physically, our users have to wait their turn to get in line in order to get the material they want. And the more interesting the item is, the longer you'll have to wait, right? So this is something that our users are already perplexed about. And this whole wait your turn and tolerate it is not something that they're going to be happy with in the future. The need to figure this out and to solve this resource sharing is pertinent, I think, and I discuss it in the chapter. Perhaps as we saw with Netflix and Amazon.com, the subscription model we see in the retail world would be one that we can adopt. The ones that say, if I'm a member, then I have unmonitored flow, but if I'm not, then I don't, is probably the direction that we're going. Briefly, real quickly, I was on a plane talking to a city councilman, and he was really surprised to hear that his local library offered free downloadable ebooks. And when I explained that to him, he got past his initial disbelief that this was possible. And his first words were, I suppose there's a long wait. That's painful to me.
Thank you, Wayne. All right, Marshall, what are your thoughts?
Well, so it's always kind of fun and interesting to think about where technology is going to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And it's hard to think in the very long term, but you can kind of look at the shorter term, the 2 to 3 to 5 years, a little bit, make better projections about that. So, you know, I you can already see kind of in the work some new platforms that I think will be interesting for libraries. From Scandinavia, Curia platform for public libraries. We hear a lot of talk about Folio for academic and research libraries. So those will be interesting things to watch as they likely play out in the next few years. The shape of the industry has continually changed. It's going to change some more. Certainly in the direction of more consolidation, more horizontal and vertical consolidation, where the technology products that libraries use are a little bit more interleaved with the discovery and content packages that they're involved with as well. So that I think has important implications both on the content and the technology side. And then some interesting technologies that we're already seeing a lot of use of, but there'll be more of that, I think, going forward. Semantic web linked data has been the key topic for the last 4 or 5 years. So I think in the next 4 or 5 years, it's going to be even more. And even more recently, we're seeing a lot of interest in virtual reality, in artificial intelligence, machine learning. There's been some interesting discovery services that are making use of machine learning to help users explore content. I think big data is certainly a very large topic of interest. How do we kind of create kind of large repositories of information about use and users and content that can be mined in order to be able to do analytics and decision making to help libraries and other organizations kind of improve their services. So there's a lot to think about, a lot of possibilities, and I have no real crystal ball.
Thank you, Marshall. So do you guys have any comments or questions for each other or further observations on this topic?
I just want to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel.
I just want to recognize Wayne's anecdote with his city council member. I had a similar experience just as a patron of my local library where I discovered I could download stream movies from my local library, which was awesome, but I was limited to 6 per month. And with my librarian hat on, I can, hypothesize a lot of reasons why that might be the case. But with my patron hat on, I'm like, why is this the case? I want it all. And so what he said really resonated with me from both sides.
Yeah, there's this idea of scarcity again. But I'm really heartened by the fact that both Marshall and Rachel are talking about the need for strategic planning. And I think that is exceptionally important and critical now for all the readers. We're pretty good at knowing what our strengths and our weaknesses are, but we fail, I think, to also look at the opportunities and the threats. And, how will things like net neutrality affect us as we move toward these new service models in the future? Are there other threats or even opportunities that we can take advantage of as librarians as we move forward? So let's not forget about those as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Marshall?
Well, along the same lines that, you want to manage expectations, that, a library has a lot of kind of interesting content that's digital and can be downloaded and so forth, but a lot of restrictions on that. And kind of realize that kind of the business and legal environment that we face is pretty adverse to be able to kind of go beyond some of the bounds that are kind of creating scarcity against this expectation for kind of unlimited use of content. So I think we face some real challenges.
Great, thank you all. We'll move on. So we've addressed the changes, we've addressed the changes of the past few years and the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. At the core of the information landscape are the people who work in these organizations, providing services to the communities that they serve. This leads us to focus on today's information professional. So what advice do you have for the new information professional to meet the needs of tomorrow's information landscape? And based on your area of expertise, what are some of the key competencies that information professionals will need to succeed in meeting the needs of the communities and organizations that they serve? So we'll start with you first, Rachel.
Yeah, so I know that there is much discussion about what are the competencies of the information professional of the future, and a number of different competencies have been discussed. I'm going to highlight three that I think are very critical and align with my chapter on design thinking, and that's creativity, problem solving, and flexibility. And the reason that I want to emphasize these three is that I think they'll be applicable to current students, current information professionals, and people thinking about the future of the information professions, regardless of what context you're in, regardless if you're working in a public library or school library or some kind of corporate information setting. I think all of these can serve the information professional well, because there are always going to be problems that need to be solved. You're always going to be needing to think of new and creative ways to solve them, and that's going to require a lot of flexibility. Just as we were just talking about in the discussion, there are always legal constraints, financial constraints, resource constraints, and so having flexibility to come up with creative solutions to address those is key. I think design thinking is one model that can offer people a way of trying to achieve some of these competencies. It's by no means the only way, but I think it's a very resonant way. And my one piece of advice in preparing for tomorrow would be to encourage librarians and information professionals to treat their work explicitly like design work. I think much of what we've done in the past has actually been design and aligned with design thinking, but we don't conceive of it in that way. And so how much more powerful could we be if we harness some of the tools and principles of design to develop new ways to incorporate and support things like those library values or new technologies that are emerging.
Thank you, Rachel. And Wayne, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's pretty great that I'm seeing now for myself the beauty of having these three chapters together, because there is so much dovetailing and there is so much resonant about each one of us that could basically be written about any one of our topics. But if I could boil down my chapter into just one or two sentences, is that if our current practices stay the same and the printed book goes away, then we, and I mean both collection developers and librarians, could be in real trouble. But I had some fear in writing the chapter because I really didn't want to see people going out on professional blogs or Twitter and Facebook and saying, hey, did you read in this new textbook, Wayne Disher said everything we're doing with books is worthless. Well, that's not true. My point is just that some of the things that have worked fine for us in the past may be nearing their expiration date now, and we need to be more proactive as a profession and be more prepared. So my advice is not to hurry up and dump everything that has to do with printed books, but rather to think of strategic ways to start to reposition ourselves so that we will be viable in the future without books if that becomes necessary. So we need to reframe the conversation and engage our colleagues and our staff members and our provosts and our boards and our community members about these very questions. A lot of our conversations on this topic have been explaining why books won't go away. And I think that doesn't really position us very well. And I think that what we really need to talk about is, if books go away, then this is what we will do. And I hope that after reading the chapter, that's the advice that readers get.
Thank you, Wayne. Marshall, what are your thoughts?
Well, so again, with technology, it really is a very quickly changing world. And of all the areas of kind of professional development, it's really important for those in the field to kind of constantly refresh their expertise and the awareness of the issues that are going on, but relative to their own career context. The question is, does everyone need to be a technologist who works in these kinds of organizations? No, not necessarily. But since technology is so pervasive, it really does require, kind of a level of awareness and skill and information that is a challenge to keep up to date. Those of us who started in the profession many years ago, if we just knew what we knew then, would be pretty useless today. So just constant renewal of information. and skills. And what's the right blend of kind of high-level information, how much kind of understanding of ongoing trends, how much hands-on expertise with software and systems, kind of all relative to your particular subject domain of what you're doing for your organization. So it's a component of a kind of broader set of information experiences that have to be continually cultivated. And then it's the emerging trends that I think are pretty interesting and important to be aware of. That, it's important to kind of invest the right amount of time. I realize that time is limited, but to be selective about, which tools to invest in learning, which kind of trends to keep your eye on, and think about how they're going to change, the world that you work in. And focus on the ones, that actually have the most promise, as it seems to you, to be relevant and to help you and your organization advance, and how to advance through kind of the next phase of your career. So again, I just close saying, that information professionals don't necessarily be technologists, but I think it's really important that they be tech savvy.
Thank you, Marshall. So those were really great pieces of advice, and I do think that there's some good synergy across them. Do you guys have any questions or observations you'd like to make that about these kinds of advice that you're giving to the information professionals?
I think creativity is something that I'm seeing being more creative, which, if I'm honest, is not something that librarians, I've seen a lot in librarians being creative, unless it's just a matter of putting up a display or putting up a nice billboard. So this idea of using our creative energy more is something that's going to be critical, I think, as we move forward. Looking at trends and trying to think about what these trends mean, not only right now, but 5, 10, 15 years down the future, and how they might apply.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Rachel and Marshall, did you have anything else?
Well, I just want to sort of piggyback on Wayne's comment about, he used the word reframing, which I really appreciated. And I think that ties into that creative ability and the idea that maybe we haven't traditionally found librarianship to have creativity, but that reframing, thinking about something from a new perspective or in a new light, can help foster that. I know a lot of people are afraid or intimidated to be quote unquote creative. And so maybe reframing is a good phrase to use to help people sort of get over their intimidation a little bit.
Yeah, I certainly like that because of the fact that reframing allows us to think about not only what we see, but also what our communities and our users see. I think that's really important, that we need to be able to involve our users in and asking them, what do they see us being, 20, 15 years down the road, and for us to listen. We have these biases in our own minds about what we think library services should be like, or what information services should be like in the future. And it could be something completely different than what our users think. And we need to not only ask, but also not be afraid to listen.
Thank you, Wayne.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, so I'd like to thank Rachel Ivy Clark, Wayne Disher, and Marshall Breeding for joining us in this webinar on design thinking and managing collections and technology. I am grateful for the insights and advice that you've shared today in this webinar, and for your contributions to information services today and introduction. To the listener, thank you for joining us. I hope you have gained a deeper understanding of the changes, challenges, and opportunities in the field of library and information science. And for more information, check out the supplementary materials that are available to you via the online supplements. So thank you again.